Hello, and welcome to Student Affairs Live, the online learning community for student affairs educators. I'm your host, Keith Edwards. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm a speaker, consultant, and coach. You can find out more about me at keithedwards.com. On today's live broadcast, we're talking about social class in higher education. This episode of Student Affairs Live is part of the HigherEdLive network. All of our episodes offer you direct access to the best and brightest minds in education. Be a part of our live broadcast by sharing your knowledge. Participate in today's discussion by tweeting us using hashtag HigherEdLive. Thanks to Erica Thompson for tweeting at HigherEdLive and monitoring today's back channel. If you have questions for our panelists, please tweet at HigherEdLive and we'll do our best to incorporate them into today's discussion. We broadcast Student Affairs Live approximately twice each month on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern. Today's live broadcast is powered by Platform Q, education's conduit online engagement platform. Learn how to integrate continuous online engagement into your marketing and enrollment plans using Conduit. Visit platformqedu.com. All of our episodes are recorded. They're free and easy to access in the video archives at HigherEdLive.com. Or take HigherEdLive with you on the go by subscribing to the podcast. HigherEdLive is produced by mStoner, a digital-first agency committed to tailored solutions that drive real results. mStoner asks, have you ever heard someone say that you could take the logo off your website and it would look like every other institution out there? If you're cringing or laughing nervously, the upcoming mStoner webinar is for you. Join mStoner's co-owner and co-founder today, April 24th at 2 p.m. Eastern, just after this episode wraps. It's not too late to register. Save your seat before it's too late and learn the tools you need to make your homepage distinct and compelling during Breakup with Your Home page, because I'm bored, moving beyond the universal homepage. We're tweeting out a link now to get registered here shortly. And now on to today's show. Today we're talking about social class in higher education and the new book, Straddling Class in the Academy, from our panelists. The book is officially out on April 30th, but you can pre-order today through Stylus or Amazon.com. I'm grateful to both of you for being with us. Love for each of you to introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about you and the work you do. And we'll start off with Sonja.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Sonja Ardoin. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am an educator. I'm a learner. I'm a facilitator. And I'm very proud to be from small town Louisiana. That is where I will always call home. The town of Vidrine, Louisiana. Doesn't have a zip code, but is home to me. I am a first-generation college graduate ×3, which I am very proud of, being both a first-generation college graduate and somebody who has the privilege to hold a Ph.D. I study social class. I study rurality. I study college or preparation and pathways in careers in higher ed and student affairs. Do a little bit of dabbling in leadership. And also have the opportunity to be a faculty member in the Student Affairs Administration program at Appalachian State in North Carolina. And I'm coming to you today from my living room in the big city of Dallas, North Carolina.
Awesome. Welcome, Sonja. I really appreciate that. I, too, grew up in a small town. I grew up in a town of 89 people. We had our own zip code, but no stoplights. So glad to have that. Becky, let's turn it over to you. Tell us a little bit more about you.
Awesome. Well, welcome. I am Dr. Becky Martinez, and it's important for me to say that. I also am on my couch, and if you hear a 7-year-old, know that he's on spring break, and I will ask him again to be quiet. And then I think that like really is this whole class thing. So it was a kind of a perfect space to be. I live in California, Hemet, California, not unless your grandparents have lived there. Do you know where that's at? So it's Southern California. I am a facilitator, consultant, trainer with a focus on organizational change and social justice. And I have found a love having conversations and doing work around social class identity, classism, race, particularly as somebody who's multiracial, and then general broad social justice. I too identify as a first-generation college student with lots of letters in back of their name, and still don't know what the hell that means at times. I do know that it means that I get different treatment and I have more access, and I'm still figuring out how to balance that with my 3-minute drive home to my parents' house that have a very different way of being.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for joining us. I really appreciate this. Super excited to have this conversation with you, and super excited to have the book come out. I think on Monday or Tuesday, April 30th is Tuesday. So really eager to have that. But Becky, maybe you could tell us a little bit about how this project came to be and some of the origins of this, and then we'll talk a little bit about what it has become.
Yeah, so I think given Sonja and my background, we've been in conversations around this for a while. And I'm not actually quite sure if it was at SJTI, Sonja, when you were an intern, but there was a point in time where we were talking about class in the academy. And I said, wouldn't it would be kind of cool if we could have a book that shared stories from folks like our background. So people that grew up poor, working class, that have shifted their class, however that's defined for them, as a result of higher education. And Sonja, being Sonja, said, yeah, we can do that. I know a publisher, because she had the other book. And so it was at that moment that I was like, well, damn, let's get this done. And so we just continued to have conversation of what it would look like. We knew that we wanted more than our voices to be it. We didn't want it to be, quote unquote, too academic, because I think oftentimes in this work we can stay in a headspace. And so we wanted to really highlight or bring about folks' stories about what it is like to straddle and to be in a place of confidence and struggle. I think that's like, I know that we hold often those spaces of, like I know how to navigate and it may not be in my value system, or I don't know how to navigate. So that is like, that's how it was birthed, so to say, a conversation between some friends, knowing that there was some stuff that was not out there, and how to support people like us. So there's a bit of selfishness. And a bit of how do we give back.
And I'll add to that too, Becky. I think I think it was in NASPA, we were talking about it, because we had been trying to present together at different conferences on social class. And so we had some traction. NASPA has a socioeconomic and class issues knowledge community. And so we had asked some questions about, hey, can we do this pre-con? Because an hour is not enough to talk about class stories and all of those things. And so through that avenue, we were able to host, I think, 2 years of a pre-con with our colleagues, Doctors Jamie Washington, Tori Zavoda, and Tom Seeger. And so being able to be in that space and start to have those conversations, there also seemed to be a desire from at least some people in the field to engage in this kind of storytelling around social class. And there seemed to be a lot of emotion and like desire to explore that space.
Yeah. And I would add, there was in every session that we have done, because we did both the pre-cons and we've done the 1 hour sessions at both NASPA and ACPA, we would have people that would come up to us and say, thank you. This is the first time that I've ever talked about this. And they would be, mid-level or senior level folks and entry level, that they've been doing work around equity or inclusion, or been doing some part of social justice work, and yet they've never had a conversation about it in an intentional way. And now we're doing that. Yep. Yeah.
Well, Sonja, maybe you can tell us, that's a little bit about how this got started. Tell us about what the book is and how this is kind of organized, and then we'll talk about some of the takeaways.
Yeah, sure thing. So I think one of the things, as Becky and I were talking about doing this project together, we were interested, number one, in collaborating together because we share a similar background in our social class of origin, and we experience that social class of origin differently because of the layering of our identities, right? So we both may identify as come from working class backgrounds, but I identify as white, Becky identifies as multiracial, and so we experience that social class differently. I experience it differently in the Southeast than Becky does out in California and the West Coast. And so as we were thinking about this book, we said we want to represent how social class is experienced not only throughout the academy and all the different roles people play within the academy, but also about making sure we represent how people with different layers of identity or the identity intersection really showcases that in terms of identity dimensions, but also in terms of location and part of the country that the person is currently living in or representing. And so as we started to think through the book and kind of what it looked like, and people can look at the table of contents. It's on the Stylist website. It's on Amazon. But you can see that we have really tried to think about how do we set up the book to where we begin the conversation around social class identity? What is it? How do we grapple with it? It's kind of messy. Becky and I have done some other writing together, and it's always interesting because when you write about social class, often the editors or peer reviewers want to say, well, give me a precise definition. I find that really hard to do because there are some definitions out there. For example, Class Action, which is a great organization. I think their website's classism.org, but offers some definitions, but it's not a clean, easy part of identity. I think, well, really no identities are, except maybe age, has a kind of clean delineation. And so we try to bring out some of that nuance and complexity in describing what social class is and how it's experienced. And then we really want to focus on stories. And so we invited 24 colleagues, in addition to Becky and myself, to share their actual stories. So we collected 26 narratives, if you count both of ours. And we wanted to really create them from different parts of the academy. So you'll see we have a chapter on the undergraduate student perspective. And those 3 students represent 3 different parts of the country, public and private institutions, and have a different layering of identity dimensions there. We have a graduate student chapter, which represents 1 master's student and 2 doctoral students. We have 3 levels of administrators, so those representing kind of early career, mid-career, and senior administrators, as well as non-tenured faculty. And some of those folks are on tenure line, some of them are not, but they're currently non-tenured. And then we have tenured faculty. And then we have a chapter from folks who have shifted outside of higher education to PK-12 to other fields completely, sharing what their experience like when they were currently employed at a higher education institution. And so we really wanted to look at the breadth of experience and how it's not just an undergraduate or graduate student thing. It happens for administrators, it happens for faculty. It sometimes encourages people to leave the field altogether because of some of the tensions that happen around social class identity. So we're supremely grateful for those 24 folks, and all their names are listed in the table of contents and with the chapters, for being willing to share their stories. And we did print the actual stories. So we didn't reword them. We printed their narratives because it's really important to hear somebody's story in their own kind of voice and writing. And so you'll see the actual narratives. And then for each chapter, Becky and I did an analysis of those 3 stories to look for themes within each chapter. And then we also looked at themes across all of the chapters as well for more of a narrative analysis across all the 26 stories in the book. And then we offer some implications for practice for folks to think about how do we engage more around social class in higher education and student affairs. So it really is a book about people's stories and narratives. I think folks in the field will recognize some names and not recognize others. But I think that points to the importance of knowing who our colleagues are and starting to talk about and engage around social class so that we don't assume everybody is of kind of middle or upper class backgrounds in the academy.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really cool idea for a book because it's not an edited volume, right? These people didn't write different chapters, but you got lots of different stories, kind of organized them together, and then added your own analysis. I think that's a really cool way to bring in storytelling and lots of different voices into this, but also have kind of a coherent analysis from the 2 of you. Becky, I feel like you were going to add something there.
Yeah, I think what is important in regards to the stories are we didn't give them like, here's what you have to talk about. And I think some folks struggle with that in the beginning, but it was really, tell us what your story is. And I think we gave them 3 thinking prompts. And so what you will notice in the stories is there's not this, okay, so let me talk about this and this and this. There's not a structure to it. It is really tell us what your story is. Which I think is beautiful because people were able to, there are themes and then there are differences and it's not structured and it is like, okay, you have to have a certain word limit and blah, all those boundaries around publishing. And they approached it from very different angles and ways and feelings and headspace and heart space. So I think that was one of the challenges and the beauties of asking these 24 people to be part of this project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Super cool. So I know you didn't want to get like a precise definition of class, but I think it would be helpful. Like, what is it that we're talking about? I'm curious if the two of you use class and socioeconomic status interchangeably, because I do. Not sure if that's a good way to do that. No, but I'd love to kind of think about how you've talked about that.
Sure.
Yeah. Oh, so I think when I put stuff into social media, I always say hashtag class is more than money. Mm-hmm. And so that is the approach that I think we come from it, right? And so there's the SES stuff, there's the economics. And I think that that's important to pay attention to, because that, really goes into, what I can buy and if I can fly. And, I'm in the middle of purchasing a car. And so that gives me options of what kind of car I can purchase. That gives me options that I don't necessarily have to go to the grocery store and say I have $47 and pay attention to that like I did when I was younger. And it's so much more, especially when we have the layer of the academy. And so, there's so many different forms of capital. And I think that's one of the reasons that we don't engage it in higher education, because higher education perpetuates some of that. And maybe some of it has been birthed through higher education. I don't know if it's a chicken egg conversation. And so how do we talk about the elitism of higher education, or the differential treatment based upon degrees or positions or titles or where your office is? Because that's some deep, rough stuff. And we're not, and we don't have the tools to be able to engage in it. So there are ways of being in regards to how class shows up individually, at the group level and institutionally, and how are we able to clearly name those beyond money? Because I think money is the easy piece, right? It's all the other stuff that is difficult and unconscious. I think that there's a lot of unconscious stuff, and so how do we increase our awareness to recognize how various ways of class and classism show up in the academy, but also in our lives? Because it's, for me, beyond the book. Yeah.
Well, and it's not, and money is a little bit more complicated. There's income money, and then there's wealth money, the money that you have coming in, and then the money you have, right? And so those can be different things, but then also status and how people see you. And then, things like what if you're a faculty member, what discipline you're in, right? People maybe have perceptions about that, the clothes you wear, where your office is, how many windows you have, all sorts of things. And so educational background and not what that is and what that's perceived, right? Sasha, do you want to add to our sort of expansive view of class?
Yeah, I will. I completely agree with everything Becky said. And, we often, I think, stick to the money piece because it's something that we feel like we can fix. And so in the higher ed space, we think, we'll make college free and that'll fix it. But I would offer that it doesn't fix it. Hell yeah, it makes it easier, right? If we don't have to think about tuition and fees and whatever, it certainly makes it easier. And I think if you read particularly the undergraduate student stories, if we're talking about undergraduate experiences in the book, you'll see that students talk about not being able to find community. And they talk about not understanding the systems and not understanding conversation. I think about myself. I was an undergraduate student, 21 years old. They sent me, I was being sent to a conference, a student leadership conference, and I'd never flown. And my advisor was supposed to come with me, and she ended up getting sick and couldn't fly. And so I remember being at the airport thinking, I have no idea how to do this. I don't know how to go through security. I don't know the sounds a plane makes. I don't know any of this stuff. And, that navigational capital or ability to move through systems that are not systems you're used to, I think can really provide some challenges. I think about, what I call hoity-toity kind of events at universities or in life, where there's, a gazillion utensils and, all of these food that I wouldn't normally eat, all of those kinds of things, and how even though I now have perhaps a different socioeconomic status than my parents do or than I did as a child, that doesn't make those spaces any more comfortable or easier for me to move through. And so I think when we think about social SES or socioeconomic status or income is part of social class, but it is only one part. And there are lots of other parts that we need to think about and consider in how we welcome students, faculty, and staff on our campuses.
Well, and you're pointing to this notion of, I think, class is an interesting identity, because I think even as our social class changes, a lot of our values remain the same. That certainly is the case for me. My class reality is very different from my class origins, and I find my values kind of sticking in with some of that, which has some upsides and some downsides. So, I think that's a little bit different with class. Well, you've spent all this time as co-conspirators leading pre-conferences and sessions, and as friends having conversations, and then you invite all these other folks in to share their stories, and you're looking at all these stories and all these very different perspectives from places in the academy and identities, and doing all this analysis. Tell us what the two of you learned. I mean, through this book project, you've obviously thought about and studied class quite a bit, but I'm really interested in what kind of emerged to you that was maybe a surprise to you, or helped you shift your thinking in a slightly different way than you had previously.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think, Becky, do you want to go? Or do you want me to go?
No, I think you're up first.
Okay. So I think one of the things, as we got the initial submissions of the narratives from the contributing writers, the first thing I sat with as I read them was, like, these are really powerful and raw and real. And in some ways I felt super indebted, not only for the individuals sharing their stories with me and letting me read their stories, but also their vulnerability and courage in being able to share those stories with the world. And a lot of folks, as we were going back and forth with, edits and things like that, folks would say, this was really hard to write. Yeah. And wanting to do more reflection and space and talking to other people that had written for the book, other contributing writers, about the process, because it's raw and real. And, in some ways it's like standing out there in the open naked saying, hey, like, here I am, this is my experience. Like, and it's scary, particularly for some folks who perhaps in the field are perceived as folks who have it all together, who hadn't had struggle, or, those sorts of things. And so, that was the first thing. My first reaction and learning from people was, one, it takes a heck of a lot of courage and vulnerability to be willing to write for this book, and that so much gratitude for those folks being able or willing to share their stories, so that collectively we can learn more about social class and how to engage in that dimension of identity in our work in higher ed and student affairs.
Yes. Even as I hear that, I'm emotion is in my space. I think that we hadn't anticipated, because some folks would email us back and say, I'm struggling. This is really hard, or I had tucked that back in, this corner of my head and I hadn't thought about it. And I for me, and Sonja and I talked about this, like, that is even that could be a chapter, right? Or a book or an article, like the impact of folks that we hadn't considered. I think because it is what she and I are so delved into. And so maybe, in fact, probably 15 years ago, when somebody would have asked me to write a narrative, I would have been at that same space. Like, oh my gosh, all of this stuff is coming up. But because I've been practicing it a little bit longer, I still get a motive, and I can be more clear on what that experience is. And we hadn't expected that. Oh my goodness, things are being stirred in me that I hadn't thought about in 20 years. And so the courage and the vulnerability and the willingness, and forever grateful for them. I think that some of the other things that, as we look at the chapters, and it's sad and frustrating and true, is that we have tenured faculty members that have been in the academy, and they're well known, and they've been writing, and they have all of the accolades, that they have all of the ways that you should show up in the academy in regards to all the credentials. That's what I'll say, not accolades. And their stories are so very similar to the undergraduate students. And it's like, wow, we haven't changed. Right? And so, and I'm not talking their story from when they were an undergraduate student. It is what their experience has been recently as a tenured faculty member or somebody that's been in the academy for a while, in regards to not belonging or still needing to navigate and really quite not knowing what the rule book is, or the rule book is against what their own values are. So there's just those similar stories. And so Sonja and I got to figure out what the next project is around this. So that was just, it was a fascinating journey to see the similarities in that space.
Well, I mean, you know, both of you have expressed great appreciation and gratitude for the folks who contributed and shared their stories, and I think that's great. And it also seems to me that you created something unique. You created a great gift for them by holding space for this and creating space and asking the question and giving them time to, you know, to be engaged in the opportunity to think about something you haven't thought about for 20 years is a pretty remarkable thing. So it's a wonderful gift that you've offered back to them, and then sharing it with others who get to then do this. This is almost like a research project, right? It's a qualitative research project, except the participants are known. They put their names on this rather than, you know, participant number 3 said this. And so I think that's really remarkable in there. What other lessons came to you through this project, and you were reading these stories and doing your analysis?
I think one of the things that sat with me is I don't know that any of the analysis showed us something that was completely surprising to us. I think the analysis across the stories was really more affirming what we've experienced anecdotally, individually, and collectively through, you know, having a working class or poor class of origin and working and being in the higher ed space. And I think it was really interesting to think about and see people talk about kind of I think the term we use in the book is the costs. But basically, you know, this balancing act or navigation and managing kind of all the different parts of who you are in terms of social class. And so, you know, we had some of our contributing writers talk about, you know, I had to go back and talk to my family that I was writing about this. Or, you know, being in the academy, how do I explain that to my family, whether it's from the undergraduate level and what you're trying to study, or you're a student affairs practitioner. And if your family if you're also a first generation college student, which of the 24 contributing writers, 23 of them, along with Becky and myself, so 25 out of 26 would identify also as first generation college students. And what is the overlap around experiences as a first generation college student and somebody with poor and working class of origin? And where are those separate? And so that's sort of hard to tease out, because so many of the folks did identify with both of those, with the status and with the social class identity dimension. But I think this thinking about, we always sell higher education, both the pursuit of a degree, but also the field at large as this good thing. And it is. And what are the costs to that in terms of relationships with family, in terms of, you know, I go home to my home community and they are really proud of me. And they still say, you don't talk like us no more. You think you're too good now, you know, all of those things. And so it's really this interesting kind of sitting on a fence between I am who I was, I am who I am, I can fit in both spaces, and yet neither of them kind of accepts me in my totality in some ways. And so those costs, I think, showed up in the narratives, for me at least.
Yeah. I would say a couple of other things that surfaced for me were it's more than about them, right? And so obtaining these degrees and being in college, whether it's as an undergrad or as a doc student, they are shepherding and bringing in a community. It is more than them. And it is not individualistic. It is not, as you can tell, I'm getting emotive in that space. And I think that higher education doesn't necessarily work like that. It's very individual, and get your degree and then pursue the next one. But with these folks, it was, it is my network, whatever that looked like, that helped me get here or that resisted me getting here. because of the cost, right? Or because of the, I don't understand, or I don't know, or how are you going to show up once you have these degrees? And I think the other thing that was, that spoke volumes, and it's linked together. I think there's so much links as we think about the themes, as we looked at the themes, is that because of this space of it's more than me, then what is my responsibility to pay it forward, right? Or to give back. And this struggle of, do I go back or don't I go back? And what does going back look like? And there's this internal dissonance that happens around that, and knowing that it is more than me. And not something that we necessarily didn't expect. And it still hit us. Like, oh my goodness.
Well, and I think it's more than a responsibility. It's a little bit of a pressure too, right? Yeah. Not just responsibility of that, but how am I going to, I feel like I need to, and how should I do that? And that might be all self-imposed.
Oh, right. Right. And then how are we engaging that, right? So how do we talk about that in our workspaces or in the classroom, or when a student is coming to us, or when a colleague's talking to us about that? And if we don't have a critical consciousness about that, we just may, rationalize it out, as opposed to where folks really are in that space of being straddling.
Well, and I think too, this concept of it's an invisible dimension of our identity, unless, particularly for folks who are straddling, right? So if I'm walking around campus, or even, I go to the local library here in Dallas, North Carolina, if I'm wearing this, people don't automatically assume, right? Oh, she has a poor working class of origin. And so the invisibleness of that identity makes sometimes sharing hard, because sometimes people are like, that's not true for you. They want to put, assign a social class to you, which you may or may not identify with, based on this combination of origin, kind of current reality, as well as this perception people have of you as well.
Well, you're reminding me of one of participants of my research on college men, who was from a working class background, talked about, as you were mentioning, Becky, the pressure to not just be successful, but also to give back. And for him, he was sending money home and doing some childcare things, but then also kind of a survivor's guilt of, I'm not the smartest one of my friends. I don't know why I'm here and they're not, but I am. And so now I have to be successful. I can't mess this up. And why am I here and they're not? And it just creates a lot of internal stories that we tell ourselves, and a lot of pressure and a lot of responsibility.
Keith, what you say that reminds me of some of the literature talks about this kind of combination of imposter syndrome with traitor syndrome. And so what you're talking about is this, or how I hear what you're talking about is this traitor syndrome of, like I think about, Becky mentioned earlier, like car shopping. My car is just turned 10 years old. I have roll-up windows, and so manual windows, manual locks. And that's important to me. Not because I can't afford, but I think that I was raised to think, well, it's going to break, and it's more expensive, so why pay for something that's going to break anyway when, my manual window is never going to break. And so it's always going to work. And so like thinking about, I think about like when I got my iPhone, I felt sort of like a traitor, right? My parents, don't have internet. They, now use like flip phone kind of cell phones. But so it's like trying to hold on to some of those things, even though those modern conveniences that I can afford per my income would make my life easier. Perhaps I still hold on to some of those things because I'm like, no, like I'm not going to be a traitor because I've been a traitor in all these other ways. And so I'm going to hold on to these things because I didn't for all these other things. Like now I like to travel and I have these multiple degrees and I get to write books with amazing, brilliant colleagues. Like, so if I get to do all this other stuff, what am I going to hold on to that reminds me of who I am?
Yeah. Yes. So Sonja and I have had that conversation about her car, and I told her, Sonja, I'm sad because I'm not quite sure how much longer they're going to make the cars that you can roll down the window. And like, there's a piece of me that's sad for her the next time she has to go buy a car. And I think that is part of the struggle. Like, the more that I acquire in this middle upper class life, how does then that distance us from something that's like lives in my soul, right? And so the new car, right? Like I need to get a new car. I have a car that's a 2001. It has 280,000 miles on it, right? When I tell people that, they're like, what? And my mechanic's like, no, you need a new car. And so it's like, right? It's like, what do I buy? So if I buy something that is practical, that I value, that feels more in touch with my class of origin. If I buy something that's in the luxury space, then I feel like that further distances me from not just my parents, which is really important, but my values. Right? And so it's this like, what do I do? How do I do it? What do I explain? How is it perceived? How is it going to be when I roll up in that, when I go on to a family reunion? Right. And so there's always in my space of she's too good for us now, or she forgot where she came from. And then you roll up in something that definitely says that. Whether that is the representation, how about that? Because of the group and system stuff. Right. Not necessarily how I show up, but how the group and the system has me be.
Yeah, you're both pointing to something that I struggle with is, with my class reality being different than my working class origins, is where are the values from that working class background that I want to pull with me and take with me? Because that is what I value. That's what I'm committed to. And then what are just silly patterns of behavior that I no longer need to adhere to? And I catch myself doing things like being super frugal about things that I just don't need to, and thinking, why am I doing that? But versus, and how do you balance that with, well, these are my values. Like I don't want to get a new vacuum cleaner. I want to fix this one because I value not throwing things away and being disposable, right? Yeah, that navigating, because it's so deeply internalized, it's often very, until someone else points it out, I don't really notice that.
And we don't talk about that, right? We don't talk about that in our family units. We don't talk about that with our friends. We don't talk about that in the office space. And yet it is such a, as you said, internalized, right? And so there's internalized ways of being that may stress us out or have us not understand or feel devalued or more valued. And how do we create spaces to hold those conversations so that it's not internalized anymore?
Right. It's more conscious because then you can wrestle with it.
Right.
I'd love to hear from the two of you about some of the suggestions you'd have for from your work and from the contributors to this book. Some suggestions you'd have for particular student affairs professionals, since that's primarily our audience today, about how we can support students across class identities, how we can support colleagues across class identities, class realities, and class values and culture, as we've talked about. What kind of pragmatic, practical suggestions what tips would you like to give some folks who want to be better around this?
Yeah. I think, so the themes, one of the themes that came out is let's just start talking about it. And so I think we go to this like big fix it mode. And so how do we rein ourselves back from that and just begin to have conversations around it? One of my favorite questions that I ask folks is, what's your class story? And that is easy and complicated. And how do we just put into practice having conversation around it, knowing that it's more than money? I mean, we need to educate ourselves on what the concepts are. And that's important. Like, what are the models and the theories and the latest things? So buy the book, or read an article, and talk about it. Don't just keep it in our space, because we have been taught not to talk about class, right? It's a taboo subject. You don't talk about what people make or don't make, or how they live or how they don't live. And what's fascinating is we have this philosophy that we never talk about class, and we always talk about class. Right. And that can mean where I'm going to lunch without even knowing it. It's like, oh, this is what I did for the weekend, or I'm going to go get that $8 cup of coffee. Like, oh, let's meet over coffee. Or my car broke down, right? And so there are ways that we talk about class, or what I value. Like, I went to this meeting and I wanted to say this and be direct, but I know that that's not how I should show up. And so we're having conversations around class. We're just not conscious that we are. And so let's raise our awareness to be in a conscious and intentional space in talking about class, and then how it shows up in our office around spirit days or potlucks, or expectations of how to show up at a conference or conferences themselves. So, let's talk about what we know and what we don't know. That's one of the themes that stood out to me the most, of what to do. Because we can look at policies and procedures and practices, and we need to do that. And we can't do that unless we start talking about it.
And I would add to what Becky's saying, that talk about it in ways that are real and not ways that are coded. And so I think we love in higher education to talk about Pell eligible students. Sometimes we'll talk about low income students. Sometimes we'll talk about need-based scholarships. But we don't actually want to say the words poor, and we don't actually want to say the word working class. And I've gotten feedback from some folks who have edited some of my work saying you can't say those words, that you need to say these other words. And I'm like, nah, if I'm going to write for you, I'm going to say these words, because I really want to name it and not just stick to the money part. And even in the money part, we show discomfort and close off our understanding, because with things like Pell eligibility, there are a whole host of reasons students might not apply for nor be eligible for Pell, and still have poor working classes of origin. And so as we think about talking about it, I would encourage us to also actually talk about it, and not talk about it in veiled ways that keep us in a place of comfort or appropriateness, if you will, in the academy, the headspace Becky was talking about earlier, versus the heart space and real space of what experiences are like for folks from different class backgrounds.
Well, and from Twitter, Nikki Messmore mentioned not identifying with the term working class because her parents were disabled and had an annual income that was very low, but weren't able to work. So working class doesn't fit for Nikki, and prefers lower socioeconomic status folks. So this notion about, I love Becky saying, let's talk about it. And then Sonja saying, and then, well, what words are we going to use? Because the words and the language have meaning and context, and some are academic and some have different academic definitions, but then how people use them and how people identify with them and how people identify others, it gets really complicated. And then, as you're also mentioning, all this other coded language to make people feel more comfortable.
Yeah. Well, so I appreciate that, Nikki, sharing a little bit of your story. And how are we, so I think there's meaning making around these terms. There is, and how do they hit us, and what are we comfortable in using and not, or how do we identify or not, and how do we not say, nope, you can't use this term and don't use that term. So let's have all of these terms come out, and there's the stories behind the terms. And I think that's that's really the important piece to pay attention to. Sonja and I were on a campus and doing some lovely work for a few days. And, there was resistance of, what are you going to talk about? We're the development folks. We don't want, ours, I know, so you're asking for some money. We're not saying that that's bad, but I think that that's where people go to. And I always say, in privilege, let's use our privilege for good and not evil. And so we don't have that named as a bad thing unless I'm showing up in all kinds of privileged ways and treating people less than. So as I think, from a class lens, if I'm just showing up as an asshole, as Dr. Martinez, and not looking at the, the custodial staff with humanity, then I'm perpetuating that cycle. And so how do I stop myself from that? And I know I just cursed. It's one of the things that I like to do. And, right. But you're not supposed to in a professional higher ed setting. And so, how are we able to be in spaces and really talk about it? I do a lot of work and people hire me around social justice, or do some stuff around racism, and people are beginning to think about classism, but it's a really scary unknown space that we're not used to being in. And so how do we lean into that space of, let's do a staff development on social class and identity and classism. It'll be uncomfortable, unknown, but until we are able to get to those layers, that's where always it's going to lay.
Yep. And I think with that, I think it is uncomfortable for so many people because we bring our class biases with us. And so we are biased, and particularly we talk about this in the book, but there's a concept called the upward mobility bias that I think a lot of people in life have, particularly in the United States, but I think also in kind of higher ed spaces as well, that students are coming to us because they want to change their social class. And that may or may not be true. In fact, some students want to come to us. I think of a specific student. I was at a convening at Northern Arizona University, and there was a young woman on a panel who identified as Native, and she specifically talked about, I am here to go back and be a leader and elder in my community. That is why I'm here. And so thinking about that, sometimes we discourage students from going home, whatever that means for that student, because we think home is not a good place for them because they won't be able to succeed or excel or kind of whatever word we want to put on that. And it's not our, I don't think, our role to tell students where they can contribute and where their contribution is most valuable. And so thinking about how do we also understand for students who say, I'm coming here to get my degree because I want to go home and make an impact there. And for us not to say, well, that impact won't be as meaningful or as big. And so how do we, through this education and training Becky's talking about, recognize some of those biases, like the upward mobility bias, which is a kind of a piece of classism, and how do we unlearn some of that stuff in our work with our colleagues and our students?
Well, and this is the sort of narrative about neoliberal perspectives on higher education, that it's all about getting a better job and earning this. And if you have to go in debt, you'll outpace it, right? It's all about the money. And some folks would want not to make more money and escape where they're from, but they want to get tools to better contribute to the communities that they value and they care about and they're a part of. Right. And how do we I don't know that there's a lot of space for that conversation in higher education.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, even the name higher education.
Right.
Right. And so, what is the language that's out there that I've internalized to have be better than going to a trade school as a plumber?
Right.
And so how are we really looking at language that we use as I think about education, right? As I think about, I've been trying to use blue collar professionals more. Why don't we see blue collar folks as professionals? Why don't we name that in that space? And so what's the language that's used to describe where people are placed and what we value and what we don't value? And so, because I need somebody to come and work on my plumbing. That's not a skill that I have, and I will pay them to do that because that is what their profession is and that they're good at. Mm-hmm. And how do I see that as a value? Is equally indifferent than being, a doctor, being a professor, being an administrator. How do we find value in these other ways of making a living and being a person?
Right. Well, and I think the notion of a plumber is a great kind of counter narrative, right? And also about class being more than the income you make. I bet there's a lot of plumbers making a lot more than tenured faculty. But what's the social status of being a plumber? What are the connotations that people have? I recently worked with a community college, and they were saying, send all your kids to be plumbers and electricians because artificial intelligence isn't going to solve that problem. And what a great opportunity to do a trade and then own a trade and have people work for you and run your own business and do that. And all the people who are coming to their programs were people who had family members who are plumbers and electricians. So they had some of the insider story, right, about what that could be. Yeah. Well, we're time is escaping us. I'd love to hear from each of you just maybe two more really practical suggestions for people who are watching or listening. You don't have to both have them at the same time.
I would say one that I think about that is a good partner with the increasing conversation around social class is, have you done your own reflection and introspection about your class identity? And I think to Becky's point earlier, like some people, like we hide it back in the middle, somewhere in our head that doesn't come up. And so, how do we do that reflection on, our areas of privilege and our areas of challenge and what that looks like? And then also not only analyze our origin, but like what's happening for us today, and how are we showing up and what does that look like? And what are our roles, particularly for us who work in higher education and student affairs, afford us to be able to do in terms of helping other people in terms of their own reflection and introspection around their social class identity. So I think that's a pretty practical way, and I think we have to do some of our own work in order to engage in the conversations Becky's talking about.
Yeah. I would say, so that is where I would go first, as Sonja said. I think another thing that we can do is being able to take kind of a environmental scan of our office spaces and the ways that we do meetings and programs and develop budgets to really think about, what classes practices are happening right now. And again, that could be at the high level policies, and that could be at the kind of more daily stuff around, what do we talk about, or, what's our expectations for after hours networking events that we say that, that they're called happy hours, like let's get together staff development, and do some group, getting to know each other group, and how does that have a class and classes lens to it? And how do we not stop it? Like, it doesn't mean that we say don't do it, but it's being able to engage in what the dynamics could be and the impact could be on folks. Yeah.
I completely relate to that. So a quick story about that. I was at a networking event maybe 2 years ago, but this happened to me again recently in this past conference season as well. I went to a social that they were giving out free drink tickets, which you think, great, like there's not a financial barrier. If people do imbibe and choose to imbibe, they can. There's not a financial issue here. And when I went up both times, when I went up to the bartender and requested a beer, I was told you can't use that for a beer. You can only use that for wine. And my initial reaction is, well, okay, I'll take it because it's free, but like, that's not what I choose. If I'm going to drink alcohol, that's not what I choose to drink. I don't know anything about wine. Like I can get $1,000 bottle or a $10 bottle. It would taste the same to me. Doesn't matter. But I'm a beer drinker, but that's not considered as professional or appropriate. But I think that is rooted in social class and who drinks beer and who drinks wine and what does that mean? It's also gendered. But so as we think about the layering of different parts of identity, but so even things like that, what you're choosing to eat or drink or whatever also comes with some class implications and perceptions.
Yeah. What are the norms, right? So what are the norms that exist in these social spaces? And what are we, again, paying attention to how we're showing up in that and how others are? I think that's critical. Yeah.
So I'm hearing do some critical self-reflection about your class background, about your biases, about your assumptions about others and the stories you tell. Talk about it. And when you do talk about it, be careful and thoughtful about the language and what language you're using and what that might mean to you and differently to other folks and some of the coding. And then also be thoughtful about the practices and what you're asking of folks, what assumptions you're making about what people will be able to do and not do. What other suggestions would you add to some of that?
I would say one thing as we think about particularly working with students, but really with anyone on our campus, is thinking about, do we know what resources are available? So I think particularly back to a conduct case I had when I was filling in for somebody who was a conduct officer, and the student would have never been in the conduct office had they known there was an emergency fund available at the institution. And so I viewed that not as a failing of the student, but a failing of us as an institution and a system to not share the appropriate information that a student in crisis could have gotten the help they needed versus having to choose a different behavior in order to meet some basic needs. So I think that is one thing, but not just on our campus, but also in the community. I was out at a campus a couple months ago, and a student was talking about having to find their own resources and how in the community there are multiple resources for them as a single parent, as somebody who, was low income, and the people I was sitting with at the table who were administrators at the university were like, I've never even heard of this. And it was in their own kind of small college town. And so I think doing some of our own work as well as administrators and faculty to say what's available on campus and in the community, so that if it is a financial barrier, or if a student needs, healthcare or something, or just general support, what are the resources we can offer them, versus just saying, that's a really tough situation. Also having some abilities to help them along their pathway.
Yeah. Well, let's get to the resource we want to highlight is this book. So tell us about when's the book coming out, where they can get it, where they can find it, and what comes along with it.
Yes. So it comes out on the 30th. At least that's when Stylus has told us. And that is, that's one of the places that you can purchase it. So they're doing pre-orders now for those shipments to happen on the 30th of April. You could also order it at Amazon. I don't know. I mean, lots of folks order through Amazon. So, whatever works best for your needs. So that's, we're excited about it. It's been a long time coming, I think. And I'm excited for the contributing writers to be able to see their story in print and the impact that they're having on campuses, and hopefully in families. And because for us, it's so much more than in the academy. And so how is class showing up in ways that they are shopping at the grocery store or talking to their children about X, Y, and Z?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'll add to that, if you don't want to wait, Becky and I do have a chapter that's already in print. And some of the things Becky was talking about earlier around how we function in terms of norming in our kind of student affairs functional areas. We have a chapter in the recently released book called Debunking the Myth of Job Fit in Student Affairs. Reish Tran et al. Are the editors of that volume. It's also a Stylus book. And we have a chapter around the title talks about no, I won't have an $8 coffee with you. And so that is already in print if folks have access to that. In addition to ordering the book yourself, if that is not an option for you, you can ask your campus or community librarian to order the book, and that way you can then check out the book for free. So please know that that is also an option for you if you have access to a campus or community library in your vicinity.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I'm so grateful to both doctors, Dr. Becky Martinez and Dr. Sonja Ardoin, for being our panelists today and sharing the great work of yours and your contributing folks and the stories they've shared. This has been really wonderful. Got me thinking about a lot of things myself. I also want to thank Erica behind the scenes, who is doing a lot of tweeting and sharing the resources. You can receive reminders about this and other episodes by subscribing to the HigherEdLive newsletter, or browse the archives at HigherEdLive.com. Next week, we'll be talking about college men and masculinities with Brian McCowan and Dan Tillapa. And then June 12th, Sonja already mentioned it, but the Debunking the Myth of Fit in Job Searches and Student Affairs, we'll have the editors of that volume on June 12th to come and discuss this idea of fit in student affairs in higher education. So those are 2 episodes on the way that you can check out. Again, I'm your host, Keith Edwards. Thanks again to our fabulous guests and for sharing so generously with us today. And thanks to all of you who are watching. I hope you make it a great week.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.